The Memphis Grizzlies went up north to play the Toronto Raptors, and wouldn't you know it, they just needed some Canadian hospitality. Look like things are getting back to the way that you would expect them to get back to, with the Grizzlies performing at a pretty high level, starting with their best player performing at an extremely high level. And you knew we had to end 2022 with me and Damichael back together. We weren't going to let you go out without the dynamic duo putting you into 2023 in the best way possible. Let's lock in.
You are Locked On Grizzlies, your daily Memphis Grizzlies podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Grizzlies, a proud member of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team each and every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts. We're available on YouTube. You can comment, like, all sorts of different things over there. Most importantly, subscribe and make us a part of your NBA and Grizzlies consumption each and every day. You can also, anywhere you find a podcast, subscribe, rate, review to Locked On Grizzlies. It is much appreciated by myself, Joe Mullinax, one of your hosts, and it's also appreciated by my co-host, and I'm so happy to be back together with Mr. Damichael Cole of the Commercial Appeal there in Memphis. How are you doing, sir? I'm happy to hear that the weather has warmed up for you guys.
Oh, it's warmed up, but we're not void of the raindrops around here. Mm-hmm. I mean, we get a lot of rain, but you know what? The Grizzlies got to wash away some of those struggles, as well out there in Toronto. And you know what? This is the team. We're going to talk more about it. But the way they played, not necessarily, the result, but the way, the style that was out there on the floor today, that's the team that I say, could be one of those type of teams that represent the Western Conference potentially.
It was good to see them come back. Obviously they have one more game before the new year, but closing out the year on a strong note on the road. You and I have talked about the road woes. It was good to see them finish their road slate for 2022 out with a big dub there in Toronto against the Raptors. Today's episode is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline, where the game starts. Damichael, where we're going to start on this episode of Locked On Grizzlies is with, is it fair to call him the great Ja Morant at this point? I feel like he does something spectacular in every game, and he had a couple of highlight dunks in this one against the Raptors. But what was most impressive, and I know you're going to talk about it a little bit here, a career best in terms of assists. Obviously, it takes two to tango, and it was nice to see his teammates actually make some shots off of some of those passes at a higher level than perhaps they have in the past. But again, Ja Morant finds his teammates. The Raptors played a lot of zone defense, which put them in a position to collapse on Ja pretty consistently. But you and I and others have talked about Morant's extremely high basketball IQ. That was on full display against Toronto, in my opinion.
I've said it 1,000 times, I feel like, at this point. With Ja Morant, because he scores so much, I think this is more of a point to the national audience. I know, a lot of Grizz Nation kind of knows this, but I have to say it. So the thing with Ja is he scores so much. You're used to seeing him get downhill, do the scoring. That's the part of his game that's kind of elevated him to this superstar. In reality, Ja likes passing more than he does scoring.
And he has always been an excellent passer.
He's always been that way. Since he was this way in Murray State, he will tell you. He won't even just tell you. He tells his teammates, hey, run the floor, get open. I like the pass. I'm looking for you. They hear all of these types of things. I think no play demonstrated this more than there was an example. I think it was the third quarter where he and Desmond Bane were both loose on the break, Joe. And Ja Morant was ahead of the pack. He had a Raptors defender, coming in, closing in. But if he wanted to, he could have took 2 steps, threw down a nice dunk, and padded his scoring. Desmond Bane was leaking up the floor with him, was ahead of him. And instead of taking those 2 steps, getting his easy basket, he just threw it ahead to Desmond Bane, shielded off the defender, and let Des get an easy 2 points, and got another one of his 17 assists on the night. It's the second biggest assist night in Grizzlies history, all the way back to 2002 with White Chocolate, Jason Williams. So Grizzlies fans will be familiar with that name, but huge passing night for him. You mentioned the teammates getting involved. I'm sure we're going to talk more about that. But Joe, you remember that kind of famous Magic Johnson meme where he talks about that pass he made and he makes the little noise. He's like, hee. That's how Ja Morant was.
Whoa. Wait, hold on a second. Wait a second. What was that noise again?
Oh, you never heard it? He goes, hee. And he whistles past the ear with the basketball with Magic Johnson. It's one of my favorite things. It's one of the best.
I know. I just wanted to hear you do it again. I knew exactly what it was.
That's how Ja looked. Now I got to say it one more time. He's just out there. He sees Desmond Bane in the corner and he goes, hee. And the Grizzlies finished the night with 37 assists, Joe.
Oh, they sure did. I tell you what, it's just nice to win, right? I said that in the Locked On Grizzlies Now video that we do as part of the Locked On Podcast Network on social media. It's just nice to win, right? And to see them smile again. This is probably too deep of a cut for you, Damichael. I was on GBB Live, the podcast that I started once many moons ago over at grizzlybearblues.com as part of SB Nation when I was running that site. I was on that with our mutual friend, Parker Fleming. I know you've gotten to know Parker there on the ground in Memphis. And, I was talking with him, and I'm a wrestling fan, so you might get this reference. I think you like wrestling as well. Shawn Michaels gave an infamous promo once upon a time when he took some time off, talking about he had to go find his smile. And I think that the Grizzlies found their smile in Toronto from watching them play. And Ja Morant is so much of that, right? Like lots of people have written about the joy of watching Ja Morant play basketball. And I think that one of the best compliments that I can pay Ja is he finds that joy beyond himself. He seems like a very giving person. Drew Hill over at the Daily Memphian. So many people have written about the giving nature of Ja Morant. Obviously on the court, 17 assists. He gave out a lot of buckets tonight as we record this. But he also is just a giving player in terms of the energy that he provides his teammates. It starts with Ja Morant. And I know we'll probably talk next week about, the stereotypical resolutions for the team and that sort of thing going into the new year. One of the things that I want to see them do is maintain that confidence, even in adverse times. Because Dillon Brooks himself, I took your quote on Twitter for an article on my Substack. Dillon Brooks talking about freezing up a little bit when teams talk back at them, the tension that maybe kind of goes along with that, and them, I don't want to put words in his mouth, but freezing up is exactly what Dillon said. It was good to see them in an advantageous situation. No Fred VanVleet, which obviously played a role in Memphis having success in this game, but Pascal Siakam still played, and Gary Trent Jr. was still out there. OG Anunoby, everybody's favorite 3-and-D wing that every team in the NBA apparently wants. Those guys are still out there playing, and the Grizzlies seem to be enjoying playing together again, and that starts with Ja Morant.
It starts with Ja Morant, but you know what? It carries over throughout most of the roster. And it wasn't even just Ja Morant, who had the big we mentioned his 17 assists, 37 assists as a team, the most
very impressive.
The most this season by the Grizzlies. And I mean, there are a few guys to point out. Let's point out Dillon Brooks. Dillon Brooks with 6 assists on the night. I mean, 4 in the first half. We talked about him as a pick and roll guy, being one of those secondary pick and roll guys who kind of takes some pressure off of Ja. I remember at the beginning of the season during the preseason, Dillon Brooks telling me he wanted to average, 3 to 4 assists, 4 to 5 assists this season as well. Steven Adams, 3 assists. Jaren Jackson Jr., 3 assists. Desmond Bane had a couple quiet games. I think he had no assists in the last game and maybe one, but in the game before that, and Desmond Bane was a guy who's almost averaging 5 assists, before this return to play period. But 4 assists for Desmond Bane, getting closer, from that perspective. So basically the entire starting lineup had 3 or more assists. Ja Morant was, spectacular with the 17 assists. When the Grizzlies move the basketball like that, it's a tough team to beat. I can't say the record off the top of my head, but it is in the teens. They are, I believe, 13-1, maybe 14-1, somewhere around there when they get over 30 assists in a game. It's their key to winning, I think.
And it starts with John Morant and the elite passing that he brings to the table. That was on full display in Toronto against the Raptors. We'll talk more about some of the guys that benefited and also were pretty influential in that Morant creativity here in a moment. But first, this episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by the NHTSA. Let's say, it's New Year's and you're hanging out with some friends and you're putting back a few drinks, right? A few becomes a few too many. And as the evening comes to an end and people start to head out, you think of calling for a ride. You don't need to do that. You live nearby. You can make it home okay. It's not a big deal at all. But what are the odds that you get pulled over? Probably pretty slim. And even so, what's the worst that could happen? Your insurance goes up. You lose your license. You lose your job. You total your car. You kill someone. Everybody knows about the risks of driving drunk. The results are tragic and often deadly. However, that still doesn't stop everyone from getting behind the wheel under the influence. That's why police officers are out there right now looking for impaired drivers on our roads to save lives. So if you think you're okay to drive after a few drinks, especially this time of year, think again. Play it safe and plan ahead to get a ride. It only takes one mistake to change your life or someone else's forever. Drive sober or get pulled over. We'll talk about some Grizzlies that benefited from John Morant's brilliance and contributed their own morsels of it as well here next on Locked On Grizzlies. Stay with us. Welcome back to Locked On Grizzlies, a jubilant Locked On Grizzlies as we talk about a Grizzlies victory and ending 2022 on the road, at least, in a positive manner. We mentioned John Morant being excellent, especially in terms of dishing out the assists, responding well to the Raptors' defensive assignment against him. There were a couple guys that really stood out beyond Ja in terms of having a really strong game. We're going to lead off with the guy who seems to rise to the occasion in Toronto fairly consistently, probably because he's a Canadian himself and he loves playing in Toronto, Mr. Dillon Brooks. And we're not supposed to read the stats here, Damichael, but I'll briefly do it just because it's so impressive for Dillon. 25 points on 14 shots, which is massive in terms of his efficiency. 6 assists, which you mentioned in the first segment, going out there, being creative in that way. 4 for 7 from beyond the arc. Only 3 personal fouls. To me, that's the most important number, Damichael, is that one, because he is such an impactful player on the defensive side of the court that he's had some foul trouble in recent games. You could easily connect that to some of the problems that the Grizzlies have had in recent contests. And he was able to stay on the floor. He played 34 minutes against Toronto. He was, outside of Ja, I would argue, their second best player. He was very much his best self against the Raptors. And that, of course, helped the Grizzlies get the job done in Toronto.
You mentioned it with the 3 fouls, so I want to go a step further with that. He guarded Pascal Siakam in this game.
Who is very good at basketball. If Toronto fades and for whatever reason decides to trade that dude,
oh boy, here it is.
Throw a lot of pick. Oh, not for the Grizzlies. See, that's what you're going to do. That's what you're going to do the next month or so. You're going to try to goat me into trading after I say we're not going to. I don't appreciate that, Damichael. You're supposed to be my partner on this show.
Joe, you're known for putting together the most I don't know the word, but the trades.
You do know the word. You just don't want to say
trades that you put together are very notable in Grizz Nation. Let's say that.
That is a nice way to put it. I appreciate that. I appreciate that kindness in your voice.
But I mean, Pascal Siakam, you mentioned he's a force. And just going through these past few games, for one, this is the reigning Eastern Conference Player of the Week,
right?
By the way, 38 points against the Sixers, 52 against the Knicks. He had 26 against the Cavs. Then he had 36 against the Clippers. Coming into this game as one of the hottest players in the NBA. Also has had 5 assists in all of those games. Only ended this game with 4 assists. And he had 10 boards with 25 points on 8 of 19 shooting. Dillon Brooks did an excellent job guarding him. When I saw Dillon Brooks get that start, I know I mentioned on the Locked On the last episode, it'd be interesting to see, if Jaren Jackson Jr. would get that assignment. But the Grizzlies gave it to Dillon, and as the game developed, it made the most sense to me. You put the guy who has the better, lateral mobility between those 2 players that I just mentioned. And it reminded me of exactly how the Grizzlies guarded Zion Williams. You remember the Grizzlies had Zion struggle, more than most teams did up to that point in the season. Zion finished the game with 12 points simply because the Grizzlies had Dillon Brooks as the primary defender. And what you do there is you put a guy in front of him who's going to be tougher to get by. He
is not going to shy away from the contact.
Exactly.
I noticed that with Siakam as well as Zion playing into Saturday's game. That is massively important. Dillon loves it. You're exactly right, Damichael. He loves it. He lives for it. He eats, sleeps, and breathes it. He wants that physical contact and competition. When it's like the bully in the school ground, right? It's easy to bully somebody, but when somebody's willing to stand up to you, that bully kind of gets shocked a little bit. To use Dillon's own words, they freeze. He did that to Siakam on multiple occasions in the game, and I loved it. It fired me up, Damichael.
And the best part about it, Joe, is when you got Dillon, on Siakam's probably thinking, okay, yeah, I can shoot over this guy. I can back him down a couple steps into the paint and get to my spots. But the thing about it is, congratulations, you just got past Dillon Brooks. Jaren Jackson Jr., the best shot blocker in NBA since he's returned, is waiting on you at the rim. Oh, Jaren Jackson Jr. is at the three-point line with Scotty Barnes? Fine. You got a 7-foot Steven Adams at the rim waiting on you. I mean, it was the perfect game plan, I thought. It's kind of like I said, similar to how the Grizzlies guarded Bane and Williams, who they play next. But, they basically made it tough, on him in this game. And that was a big part of it. But Dillon Brooks, you mentioned it. He was effective offensively as well, getting to his spots in the mid-range, 4 made three-pointers as well. He showed out, the native Canadian showed out, going back north of the border.
Steven Adams is not from north of the border. He's from the exact opposite end of the globe, but he looked like he was from Canada in terms of the way that he played in this game.
He's a man. He's a man, Joe.
Very impressive. He, again, we're not supposed to read the numbers word for word, but yeah, I feel like if you don't watch the game, you hear the number 17 rebounds, and that sounds like a really strong performance. If you haven't watched the game, or again, the NBA does a great job with those 10-minute highlights that you can watch on YouTube the day after games. He just was so impactful for the exact reason that you mentioned, Damichael. It wasn't just his continued excellence on the glass, which he's elite in the NBA at doing. He also, Damichael, was strong defensively for the exact reasons that you alluded to. He was able to be that secondary help defender, and he was able to just be elite, as I like to say, being a massive human being. He gets how to use his body as well, if not better, than anybody in the entire NBA. That's not to say that Giannis doesn't know how to do it, because obviously he does. Or, LeBron James has been doing it for 2 decades now. He's been really good at knowing how to use his frame. Steven Adams doesn't have the basketball skill of those 2 players. I would argue he understands how to use his body to help winning as well as those 2 players. Again, not as good as them in terms of physical talent, but in terms of knowing how to use the skill that he has been given and applying it as best he can. He gets the most juice out of the squeeze when it comes to being a 7'1" large human.
I like that. I like the way that you put that. 14 points, 17 boards. We mentioned the 3 helpers earlier. And I mean, Toronto had no answer. Toronto had no answer for Steven Adams. And this is going to be, when we talk about Steven Adams, you mentioned it, but this is going to be a theme over the course of the season for any opponent who doesn't have a center who's willing to, really take some shots and to really bang. And you got to stay in position. This is what makes Steven Adams, and this is what, these guys all play off of each other. When Ja Morant gets downhill, a lot of times that center has to come help. He's out of position. When he's out of position, at that point, Ja Morant can just throw the ball in the air. As long as it touches the rim, Steven Adams is going to get it when that center is out of position. It's simple, easy-made basketball for the Grizzlies. You have one of the best point guards in the NBA who can create off of the dribble and get past, the defender in front of him, which forces the center to step up and defend him at the rim. And if Ja misses, you got Steven Adams right there, one of the best offensive rebounders in the game right now, period, there to clean it up. The Grizzlies offensive rebounding record holder. So it's kind of like a perfect combination. We saw that combination, work well together again against a Raptors team that's not necessarily small, but Steven Adams is just that good. And, we talk about how these guys all play off of each other, right? And I think that's just another great example of it. Ja Morant, when he's able to get that pressure on you and get downhill, he doesn't always have to end with 30 points because he can get you 19 points, and Steven Adams can clean up anything that he misses and finish it off and clean up, the misses of the other guys as well. So big night for Steven Adams, and usually when Steven Adams has those type of nights, it's a good thing for the Grizzlies.
Thank you for making Locked On Grizzlies your first listen each and every day. Make sure to check out Locked On Sports Today, the biggest stories around the sports world in 20 minutes or less, plus instant reactions, game recaps, and Locked On's take of the day. Locked On Sports Today is available on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. This episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by Rocket Money. Say goodbye to last year's outdated, disorganized methods of managing your money and say hello to Rocket Money, the better way to hack your finances in 2023. Rocket Money, formerly known as Truebill, is a personal finance app that finds and cancels your unwanted subscriptions, monitors your spending, and helps you lower your bills all in one place. Over 3 million people have used Rocket Money, saving the average person up to $720 a year. Stop throwing your money away, cancel unwanted subscriptions, and manage your expenses the easy way by going to rocketmoney.com/lockedonnba. That's rocketmoney.com/lockedonnba. rocketmoney.com/lockedonnba. We will be talking about the other guys in the Grizzlies Raptors game that helped Memphis pick up the win in Toronto next here on Locked On Grizzlies. Don't go anywhere. We're finishing up this episode of Locked On Grizzlies. It is I, Joe Mullinax, joined by my co-host, the very handsome, the very suave, very kind-eyed Damichael Cole, who likes to give me a hard time about trades, but says it in a very polite way, which I really do appreciate. I can't stress that enough. There were some other players in the Toronto game, and, we don't want to recap the game as much as we want to point out. When the Grizzlies, we talked about the assist number earlier in the show. When the Grizzlies play a team form of basketball with Ja Morant as the fulcrum, right? He's the point in which everything kind of swings. When everybody else holds up to their end of the bargain, it's amazing what happens, right? They're one of the best teams in the NBA. It's funny how that works. The two guys that really stood out to me, just because I think they're the two most important to the ceiling of this team moving forward at this stage, are Desmond Bane and Zaire Williams, because they're coming back from injury. Desmond Bane played almost 30 minutes in this game, which was really good to see. He looked more comfortable physically, 16 points on 6 of 13 shooting, 3 for 7 from beyond the arc, which matters a ton. 5 rebounds, 4 assists, 2 steals. He looked more himself in that way, and if he had his full allotment of of minutes, he probably would have gotten to his usual 20-ish points per game. Zaire Williams also looked good, in my opinion, in terms of physically moving. He made a 3 in the corner, which I don't know about you, Damichael. I know you're a media member, so maybe you can't fist bump as much as a lowly fan like me can. But I almost woke up my family yelling about how excited I was that Zaire hit that 3, because that's huge for him, right? The ceiling of this team and how active they are heading into trade season. Zaire Williams is that 8th guy, right? Can he be that dude, or do they need to go find a dude in the short term while Zaire gets up to speed? That's going to be an interesting storyline heading into 2023, and I thought Dez and Zaire both looked better as they progressed. Because in fairness to them, Desmond Bane coming back from a toe injury, Zaire coming back from knee tendonitis, it's not like they're going to be in NBA shape coming back from those 2 injuries. They're going to have to work into it.
Yeah, and this is something, I've talked to both these guys about, and we actually, on the last episode, I said, hey, Zaire Williams, there's zero concerns there. I'm telling you, when I talked to him one-on-one out there in San Francisco, and the guy had all the confidence in the world. He sounded like a veteran, Joe. Like, he was basically saying, look, I'm just missing shots. There's nothing more to it. He feels good. Tyus Jones echoed it, talked about how, he looks good in practice. It's just make or miss. And seeing him take those, you mentioned the shot, the 3-pointer that he hit in the face of Pascal Siakam, by the way. That shot that he hit, I think, what I look for a lot of times is pass make or miss, because, basketball is more than that. At the end of the day, it's more about the confidence you have to take this shot, to take that shot, the quality of the shot. All of that matters at the end of the day. And when he took that shot in the face of Pascal Siakam, I said, well, that's proof of what he said right there. They say actions speak louder than words, right? He said that he's confident. He said that he feels good. Okay, that showed it. Because that's one of you. You're not confident. You're here, Ja, or here, Tyus, here. Someone else get this out of my hand. I'm not about to shoot this over Pascal Siakam. He's confident. There are a lot of times, he caught another alley-oop today. There are probably 10 times in a game, and no exaggeration. If you think I'm exaggerating, I'll bump the number down to 7. There's probably 7 times in the game, Joe, where Ziaire Williams is zooming up the floor, and he's raising his hand like he wants an alley-oop.
Moves very fluidly.
Very fluidly. He reminds me of like a Randy Moss at wide receiver catching the deep ball. Like he's that type of fluid when he's running, up the floor. And sometimes the Grizzlies throw it. Sometimes, you see him leaking up. You're like, are they going to take the chance? And they don't. But at the end of the day, it puts the pressure on the defense. So even in situations where he's not scoring, he's putting the pressure on the defense. And you can go to the same thing and say the same about Desmond Bane. 3 3-pointers today. But at the end of the day, the presence of Desmond Bane is putting the pressure on defenses. And it's zero concern with him. We talked about it, the first 3 games of the season, this is kind of how he started as well. And it was that 4th game against the Brooklyn Nets where he broke out with the 38-point performance. And I think he put together 3 or 4 consecutive 30-point games after that. So Desmond Bane is trended in the right direction. Ziaire Williams is trended in the right direction. Overall, a lot of guys are trended in the right direction. They did have one guy go down in this game, Santi Aldama, Joe, suffered a left ankle injury and did not return. I believe it was in the 3rd quarter. But we know there's a back-to-back coming up. David Roddy and Jake LaRavia, by the way, down there at the Hustle, performed well. I think Jake LaRavia had 18 points as they beat the South Bay Lakers, and David Roddy had 17 points. Kenneth Lofton Jr. had 18 and 10, by the way, but we know the Grizzlies aren't going to call him up to be in the rotation. I think LaRavia and David Roddy are the potential candidates, or they go to a 9-man rotation. But Santi Aldama, he's been a big presence for this team so far. We don't know the significance of his injury yet, but he did leave early and did not return.
That is important to point out. And I do think Roddy and LaRavia make the most sense to fill that void, 2 first-round picks. End of the rotation guys, no Santi Aldama, like we talked about, throughout our time here on Locked On Grizzlies, you could easily make an argument that with Ziaire out, Santi was that 8th guy. So that's not an absence to shake your nose at, so to speak. But I'm happy to see Bane and Williams perform well, because that means that a trade is less likely, and it makes me look smart and correct, which I always appreciate because it happens so rarely. Is there anybody else as we wrap up the show here, Damichael, that stood out to you as we watched?
Hey, you the Locked On Grizzlies viewers, you realize he asked me, is there anyone else? Because Joe isn't going to call. He isn't going to point out this guy.
There wasn't any other notable performance, was there?
He's not going to point out this guy. John Konchar
reaches
double figures. Someone ring the bell for Joe. The first time since December 4th against the Pistons, John Konchar reaches double figures. Multiple made 3-pointers. He got active in transition. He was active on the glass. Big night off the bench for John Konchar. What say you, Joe?
Thumbs up, John Konchar. For those of you that are listening, I'm doing a thumbs up movement here for our YouTube viewers. So happy for John. I just want him to shoot the ball. I feel like I've made that very clear. I feel very jitty when he shoots it. So if he could shoot the ball, perhaps I'll buy a hoodie or something along those lines, and I'll feel more jitty about Konchar minutes. It was good to see him take the shot, make the shot. He rebounded well. He continues to do that, and I make light of the Konchar stuff. Again, if Ziaire doesn't click and they make a decision to not make a trade, Konchar's importance skyrockets. And that's not lost on me, at least. And I know it's not lost on you, Damichael. So it's good to see him take the shot. I know he can make it. I want him to take it. So shout out to John Konchar. Stay jitty, my friends. Thanks for making this episode of Locked On Grizzlies your first listen today. Now make Locked On Sports Today your second listen. Peter Bukowski brings you the biggest stories from around the sports world in 20 minutes. Get the analysis and opinions before anyone else with our local and national experts and insiders. Locked On Sports Today podcast is available on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. The next time we're going to be together, Damichael, it is going to be 2023. How nice. Happy New Year to you and yours, of course. You're going to have a busy New Year's weekend. I'm not going to put your full plans on blast, but I'm guessing you'll spend at least some time down at FedEx Forum, if not all the time, watching what I think, again, if it wasn't for the holiday, it's going to be a really fun weekend of basketball between the New Orleans Pelicans. That's probably the headliner on New Year's Eve. But don't sleep on the Kings. I love watching the Sacramento Kings play basketball. They're super fun, especially offensively. That's the second night of a back-to-back. It's going to be interesting to see how they use Ja and Jaren and Bane and Williams. If those guys get rested, do they punt, in air quotes, a game? There's a lot of storylines going into this weekend, Damichael.
It's going to be fun. It's going to be so much fun. You mentioned, what better opponent to end the year against than the Pelicans, a team that's had kind of a similar rise as the Grizzlies, where they primarily, built through the draft and kind of added a couple guys. They went out and made a big trade, for CJ McCollum, and you acquire, Brandon Ingram, but Zion is your big draft pick, and you kind of form a team around them. But they've hit on these draft picks, the Daniels and the Najee Marshalls, the Alvarados and the Herb Jones. I mean, it's going to be fun. And then the Kings matchup, I love that one just from an entertainment perspective. I love that one just as much. You know why? Because listening to people in Sacramento, a lot of them some people out there think Fox is better than Morant. But that's neither here nor there. We're going to take this one game at a time. You got both of those games coming up. Of course, we're going to have you covered of what happens after us on Sunday night. So big games coming up for the Grizzlies, but yeah, overall, it's the West, right? There aren't too many breaks in the Western Conference. We saw the Grizzlies earlier in the season. They got a couple games against Oklahoma City. Got a game against the Rockets and those level of teams. Now, the Suns, the Warriors, and now you got to play, the Pelicans again for a third time, and now you get the Kings. I believe this is the second time that they played the Kings. So we're getting into the fun. We're getting to the nitty-gritty stuff now.
Parity reigns supreme in the Western Conference, and it's a chance at home. It's a rare home back-to-back to be able to compete against two of the better teams in the West, try to get some important wins. It's an advantageous back-to-back, and I'm interested to see how Taylor Jenkins and company works out the rotations for those two games, especially with the Santi Aldama injury. That'll be worth watching as well. So we'll have plenty to talk about going into next week and the return to reality for so many of us as we enter 2023. Thank you so much for making us a part of your Grizzlies experience. Continue to rate, review, subscribe, like, comment, whether it's on YouTube, wherever you get podcasts. It's appreciated. Thanks for making me a part of the Locked On family. Very happy to be here. I've had a wonderful run here the second half of the year with Damichael. Only bigger and better things for you and I in 2023. I'm looking forward to continuing the partnership, Damichael, and I wish you and yours and everybody listening a healthy and happy new year. And the next time we chat, it'll be 2023. Damichael, anything you want to say to our wonderful listeners out there?
Happy New Year to all the listeners. We appreciate you, so much. We try to tell you every episode, but we truly do. Joe started here on Locked On Grizzlies in 2022. I started here in March of 2022, and just seeing the growth, we've more than doubled the subscribers, over the course of this year from before this year, and just seeing the overall growth of the Locked On Grizzlies podcast. Literally, I mean, some of you come up to me at games telling me you love the podcast and things like that, and
that's nice.
It's truly appreciated. We enjoy it, and guess what? It's only going to get better from here.
Oh yeah,
it's only getting better from here.
I have new headphones. I don't know if you guys noticed that, but I'm not going anywhere. I have new equipment. So we're going to keep building this thing up, and we're excited to do so. You'll notice some aesthetic differences and that sort of thing. We're going to continue to make the show better, and we appreciate all the feedback, everybody that makes us a part of their experience. It is much appreciated. So for my wonderful co-host, Damichael Cole, I am Joe Mullinax. Catch you next year, Locked On Grizzlies viewers / listener. Stay locked in with us. Catch you next time.